She sat in a dim room, staring at a ring that was never offered. A ring she had pictured holding, sliding onto her finger years ago, now resting quietly on the bedside table, untouched, never given, yet heavy with unspoken hopes. He was in the next room, and she could hear his footsteps pacing. Then she heard him say out loud, almost to himself, "I already made that mistake once." Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. She didn't react. She just listened. Those words buried her heart a little deeper. Why would a man remarry, but refuse to fully commit again? So many people think rejection is the worst thing you can feel, but this wasn't rejection. This was hesitation disguised as logic, fear dressed up as reason. Across thousands of relationship stories, experts say that people who resist commitment often aren't rejecting love. They're afraid of losing something deeper, something they can't fully name. Some fear losing themselves. Others fear the idea of failing someone they deeply care for. Medium. She remembered the first time they met. His laugh, so effortless, like he'd always known how to make her smile. The way he'd looked at her that first night, like she was exactly what he wanted. But now, more often than not, there was uncertainty in his eyes, an invisible wall when she brought up future plans, birthdays together, or meeting family. She'd ask, "What do you see for us in 5 years?" And he'd change the subject, talk about work, or say he just wasn't ready. Many people reading their own relationship group posts online describe this same pattern. Love is there, connection is deep, but when it comes to naming the future, something inside freezes. The Times of India. So she stayed awake that night, listening to his footsteps stop outside the door, wondering what mistake he meant, and whether fear could hold someone back from giving their heart completely. And she wondered, if that was him, would you stay? Would you keep hoping he would change? She was the kind of woman people described as steady, not because life had been easy for her, but because she had learned how to sit with discomfort without letting it harden her. Her friends noticed it in the way she listened, the way she paused before responding, the way she didn't rush moments that deserved patience. She believed love should feel safe, not urgent. When she met him, she didn't fall quickly, and she didn't push. She noticed how thoughtful he was, how he remembered small details, how he showed up consistently. To her, those things mattered more than grand gestures. She told herself that clarity would come with time, that when two people cared deeply, conversations about the future would feel natural, not forced. So she stayed present, believing that love didn't need deadlines to be real, only honesty to be strong. He was admired by almost everyone who knew him. Calm, reliable, the kind of man coworkers trusted and neighbors respected. After his divorce, people often said he handled it with dignity. No public bitterness, no loud complaints. He spoke about his past marriage briefly, always neutrally, as if it were a chapter he'd read once and closed carefully. What no one saw was how guarded he had become. He enjoyed companionship, shared routines, quiet dinners, and the comfort of someone sleeping beside him. But vulnerability was another matter. He had learned how to give affection without giving access to his deepest fears. When conversations edged toward commitment, something inside him tightened. He wasn't avoiding love, he told himself. He was avoiding pain. And in his mind, those two things had become impossible to separate. The first marriage was never mentioned directly, yet it lived in the room with them. It showed up in his silences, in the way he hesitated before answering simple questions, in how he avoided words like forever or always. It wasn't a person anymore, but a memory that shaped every decision he made. When she spoke about marriage, she didn't ask for a ring or a date. She asked for understanding. She wanted to know where she stood, not to corner him, but to protect her own heart. He listened, nodded, reassured her that he cared deeply. But reassurance without clarity slowly becomes confusion. She began to feel like she was sharing her life with someone who refused to fully step into it. And still, she stayed, because she believed patience could heal what fear had broken. What she didn't know was that the first proposal had destroyed him in ways he never explained. He had proposed believing it meant safety, permanence, a promise that couldn't be undone. When the marriage fell apart, it didn't just end a relationship, it shattered his sense of judgment. He questioned his instincts, his ability to choose wisely, his worth as a partner. The proposal became, in his mind, the moment everything started to fall apart. So he rewrote the story. Commitment wasn't proof of love anymore. It was a risk he didn't trust himself to take. As you listen to this, ask yourself honestly, have you ever held back not because you didn't care, but because caring once cost you too much? And if you were in her place, would patience still feel like love, or would it start to feel like waiting for something that may never come? The unease didn't arrive all at once. It came quietly, folded into ordinary moments that were easy to dismiss if you wanted to. A casual conversation about a vacation 6 months away would end with him saying, "Let's see how things look then." A friend's wedding invitation would sit on the kitchen counter for days because he hadn't decided if they should attend together. When marriage came up in movies or conversations with friends, he would smile politely and change the subject, asking about her day or mentioning something unrelated. Nothing about his behavior was openly hurtful. That was what made it confusing. On the surface, he was present, caring, attentive. But when she looked closely, she noticed the pattern. The future always stayed just out of reach, like a place he refused to enter, no matter how gently she knocked. Inside her mind, the questions grew louder at night. Am I asking for too much, or asking the wrong man? She replayed conversations, searching for signs she might have missed. She wondered if her expectations were unreasonable, if patience meant learning to accept uncertainty. She reminded herself that love wasn't about pressure, that everyone healed at their own pace. Yet there was a quiet ache that came from never knowing where she stood. It's something many women recognize but struggle to name. The feeling of being emotionally invested while standing on unstable ground. She didn't want promises carved in stone. She wanted honesty, direction, reassurance that her time and heart were being valued with the same seriousness she was offering. She began noticing small things that unsettled her. The way he stiffened when friends joked about, "When you two finally tie the knot." The careful language he used, always saying if instead of when. She asked herself whether love should require this much guessing. She wasn't afraid of waiting, but she was afraid of waiting without purpose. In quiet moments, she imagined her future in two versions, one where clarity eventually arrived, and one where years passed with the same unanswered questions. The second image frightened her more than being alone ever could. Still, she said nothing. Not because she didn't care, but because she feared that asking directly might confirm what she wasn't ready to face. And then she discovered something that explained everything, but changed how she saw him forever. The truth came to her in an ordinary way, which somehow made it hit harder. It wasn't a dramatic confession or an argument that forced everything into the open. It was a conversation with someone who thought she already knew. A mutual acquaintance mentioned his first proposal casually, almost fondly, describing it as extravagant and public, planned down to the smallest detail. A crowded restaurant, friends watching, a ring that caught the light, applause from strangers. She stood there listening, her chest tightening as the story continued. The proposal had been followed by a short marriage that unraveled quickly. There had been betrayal she never expected, messages discovered too late, money drained from shared accounts, and a divorce that left him embarrassed and exposed. The public joy of that moment had turned into public shame. As she listened, she realized something important. He didn't fear marriage itself. He feared looking foolish again, feared trusting his judgment, feared offering his heart in a way that could be taken from him and turned into proof of his own failure. That realization softened her at first. She felt compassion instead of resentment. His hesitation suddenly made sense. The careful distance, the refusal to plan too far ahead, the way he kept emotional doors half closed. It wasn't indifference. It was self-protection shaped by loss. But compassion quickly tangled with another feeling she couldn't ignore. If his fear came from someone else's betrayal, why was she carrying the weight of it? She hadn't asked him to erase his past. She had only asked him to be present with her. The question became harder to answer the longer she sat with it. Is emotional self-protection wisdom, or does it quietly punish the person who came later with honest intentions? As you hear this, ask yourself where you draw that line. How much protection is reasonable before it becomes unfair? And then she learned something else, something that unsettled her even more. Because this was only the version he allowed people to know. What she learned next didn't come from gossip or secondhand stories. It came in fragments, pieced together over time, from quiet conversations and moments when his guard slipped just enough to reveal what he usually kept buried. The first marriage hadn't only ended because of betrayal. It had changed how he saw himself. There was manipulation that unfolded slowly, disguised as affection and concern. Decisions he once made confidently were questioned until he began to doubt his own judgment. Friends were pulled into private disagreements, turning personal pain into something public. Arguments didn't stay between two people. They became stories told at dinners and gatherings, shaping how others saw him. By the time the marriage ended, he wasn't just heartbroken, he was disoriented. He no longer trusted his instincts, his voice, or his sense of self. The man who had proposed publicly, believing he was strong and certain, felt reduced to someone he barely recognized. Inside him, two conflicting truths lived side by side. Proposing once had made him feel small, exposed, and ashamed. It was the moment he felt he had given everything and lost control of how his story would be told. Never proposing again, on the other hand, gave him a sense of safety. It allowed him to enjoy connection without risking that kind of vulnerability. He could love within limits, care without surrendering authority over his life. To him, that felt reasonable, even healthy. But safety came at a cost he rarely acknowledged. It meant never fully stepping forward, never offering the kind of certainty that builds a shared future. And the more time passed, the more this quiet strategy hardened into a rule he didn't know how to break. She listened as pieces of this truth surfaced, and something shifted inside her. Understanding no longer brought relief. It brought clarity, and clarity demanded honesty. She realized that as long as she accepted half answers, nothing would change. So one evening, after a long silence between them, she asked the question no one ever had. They weren't arguing. There was no raised voice, no accusations, no urgency in the room. Just two people sitting across from each other, the kind of quiet that usually followed a long day. She spoke carefully, not to provoke him, not to trap him, but because the weight of what she hadn't said had finally become heavier than the fear of saying it. Her voice was steady when she asked, "Do you love me? Or do you just feel safe with me?" The words hung between them, simple and unadorned, impossible to misinterpret. He looked at her, then away, then back again, as if searching for a response that wouldn't hurt either of them. Seconds passed, then more. The silence stretched, no longer neutral, no longer gentle. It was the kind of silence that exposes what words have been protecting. He didn't answer, and in that moment, she understood something that no explanation could have softened. Silence can be the loudest confession of all. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was that care alone wasn't enough to push him past the boundary he'd built around himself. He was safe with her, and safety mattered deeply to him. But love, in its fullest sense, required risk. The absence of an answer told her where she stood more clearly than any reassurance ever had. As you listen to this, you might feel torn. Some of you may feel sympathy for him, shaped by pain that taught him to protect himself. Others may feel her quiet heartbreak, realizing that patience cannot replace mutual courage. And maybe you're asking yourself which side you would be on if this were your life, your years, your heart sitting in that silence. After that conversation, something in her changed, not abruptly, not in a way that demanded attention, but with a quiet certainty that reshaped how she moved through the relationship. She stopped waiting for moments that might turn into promises. She stopped hinting at futures he wasn't ready to name. Most importantly, she stopped shrinking herself to make his fear more comfortable. There was no announcement, no ultimatum, just a gradual return to herself. She filled her time with things she had placed on hold, long walks in the evenings, reconnecting with friends she had seen less often, revisiting plans that belonged to her alone. For the first time in a long while, her life no longer revolved around what he might be ready for someday. Her strength showed up in small, steady ways. She made decisions without checking his comfort level first. She spoke openly about her goals without softening them. She began planning a life that could move forward with or without him, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. This wasn't punishment. It was clarity. She realized that loving someone didn't mean putting your future on pause indefinitely. And in reclaiming her sense of direction, she felt lighter, more grounded, as if she had finally stepped back onto solid ground after standing too long on uncertainty. He noticed the change before she ever named it. The ease she once had around him was different now, more self-contained. She was still kind, still attentive, but no longer waiting for him to catch up. For the first time, the balance shifted. The safety he had relied on felt less certain, not because she had become distant, but because she had become whole on her own. And that's when he realized something that unsettled him deeply. He was about to lose the one woman who never tried to hurt him. Inside him, a quiet war had been building for longer than he wanted to admit. Watching her reclaim herself forced him to confront a truth he had managed to avoid for years. Proposing again meant reopening a door he had sealed shut after the first marriage ended. It meant risking exposure, standing in front of someone with nothing to shield him but trust. Every memory his mind had carefully filed away began to resurface: the public proposal, the private unraveling, the feeling of being watched as his life came apart. He told himself he had survived that chapter by never allowing himself to feel that exposed again. That rule had kept him steady, functional, and protected. It had also kept him distant. At the same time, he saw another reality taking shape. Not proposing didn't mean avoiding loss. It meant repeating the past in a different form. He was about to lose someone not through betrayal or chaos, but through his own refusal to step forward. The thought unsettled him more than he expected. He cared for her deeply, respected her, trusted her in ways he hadn't trusted anyone since his divorce. Yet the choice remained painfully clear. Love required vulnerability, and vulnerability meant surrendering the illusion of control he had built his safety around. Trauma explained why he held back, why fear felt like logic to him. But explanation wasn't the same as justification. As you listen to this, ask yourself honestly, how many times have you understood someone's pain, yet still felt the absence of what you needed? At what point does self-protection become emotional withholding, and who pays the price for that decision? The moment arrived quietly, almost imperceptibly. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, just the two of them in the room where honesty finally had room to breathe. He spoke first, his voice low but steady. I don't have a ring. I don't have a plan written in stone. But I need you to know this. I love you, and I want to try, fully this time, even though fear will always be a part of me. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't flashy. There were no witnesses, no applause, only the raw acknowledgement of everything that had come before. The fear, the hesitation, the scars from the first marriage, he didn't hide them. He named them, letting her see the whole man, not just the version he thought she wanted. And in that moment, she understood that love could coexist with fear, and that courage didn't always come with a ring. Or perhaps the choice fell differently. She stood up, collected, the weight of years of quiet uncertainty lifting as she made her decision. She didn't yell, she didn't accuse. She simply said, I can't keep waiting for a life that might never come. And with that, she walked away, each step measured, confident, reclaiming the future that had belonged to her all along. There was sadness in leaving, yes, but no bitterness. The dignity she carried forward was stronger than the heartache left behind. Sometimes, love is not about staying. It is about knowing when respect for yourself matters more than holding on to someone else's fear. Either way, the room held the kind of quiet that leaves you reflective, the kind that makes you question your own choices and the boundaries you've set in love. The resolution wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, painfully honest, and in that honesty, there was both sadness and satisfaction. It made you ask, would you have stayed, or would you have walked? And if you were him, could you have risked everything again, knowing how much you might hurt? In the quiet that followed, she reflected on what had happened, on the subtle choices that defined their lives. Some people don't fear love itself. They fear who they become when love fails, the version of themselves exposed, judged, or diminished by heartbreak. He had loved, he had risked, and he had been reduced by the first time he dared fully. And so he held back, not out of cruelty, but out of a deep, careful protection of himself. The question that lingers is not about him, or her, but about all of us who have stood at that intersection of love and fear. If someone refuses to fully choose you because of their past, is patience truly love, or is it self-abandonment? It's a question that doesn't have an easy answer, but one that stays with you long after the story ends, forcing each of us to examine the boundaries we set and the courage we allow ourselves to claim. If this story made you reflect, like the video, it helps more women find stories that speak truth. And subscribe for daily storytelling that heals, not just entertains.